My name is Arthur Hale, and I am 68 years old. I've lived long enough to understand that life doesn't always give explanations, and grief doesn't always arrive with warning. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the morning I buried my daughter. The sky over Manchester that day looked bruised, swollen with rain that couldn't decide whether to fall or hold itself in painful suspension. The air was cold enough to bite, but warm enough for breath to fog only faintly. It was the kind of gray that made everything seem drained of color, as if the world had dimmed itself out of respect or cruelty. Emily's coffin rested above the yawning earth, like a final question no one could answer. Dark oak, polished to a shine, beads of moisture forming on its surface. I couldn't stop staring at it. My hands trembled so badly that the order of service pamphlet shook like a leaf in a storm. I kept running my thumb over Emily's picture, her smiling, her eyes alive, warm, bright. The photo felt like a lie. How could someone so full of life be gone? People filled the small cemetery in clusters. Neighbors, nurses from the hospital where she worked, long-lost relatives who suddenly found time to show up when tragedy made an appearance. Their umbrellas created a sea of black and navy, dripping quietly. Every now and then someone would put a gentle hand on my shoulder, whisper a soft condolence, and step away as if afraid my sorrow might be contagious. But one person didn't touch me, didn't come near, didn't even look at me unless he had to. Nathan, my son-in-law, her husband, widower now, stood beside the coffin dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. He looked untouched, as if grief had passed him by out of courtesy. He shook hands firmly, meeting people with a politician's smile, even though the corners of his mouth kept twitching into something that felt rehearsed. He kept saying the same line to everyone. "We must stay strong." That's what Emily would want, as if repeating it made him noble. His tie didn't even shift in the wind. Mine blew sideways like it was trying to escape with the rest of me. I tried to ignore him, to focus on the last few minutes before they lowered Emily into the ground. But every small gesture from him scraped against my nerves. How he adjusted his cufflinks in the middle of the vicar's prayer. How he checked his watch while Emily's favorite hymn played. How he smiled politely at the woman who brought him flowers, while I could hardly breathe. Isn't a husband supposed to break a little? Isn't a heart supposed to show its wounds? Or maybe I was wrong. Maybe people grieve differently. Maybe numbness was his shield. Maybe. But then why did his eyes feel so cold? The vicar's voice wavered in and out of my focus. My mind kept drifting back to memories of Emily, her first steps wobbling toward me in our old garden, the way she hugged me when she passed her nursing exams, how she'd always squeeze my hand twice. Her little secret code for "I love you." I wondered if she knew how much I loved her. I wondered if she was scared in her final moments. I wondered if she felt alone. The questions broke something inside me, and the tears came again, hot, uncontrollable, the kind that made your throat burn. I tried to quiet myself. I really did. But when the coffin began its descent, the straps squeaking, the earth opening to swallow my only child, my knees weakened. I held the edge of my coat, gripping the fabric as if it could anchor me to the world. A soft sob slipped out before I could stop it. Someone behind me muttered sympathetically. Someone else handed me a tissue. But it was Nathan who reacted the strongest, though not in the way one might expect. He leaned in, close enough that I could smell the expensive cologne on his collar, crisp, sharp, almost metallic. His hand brushed my elbow, but not in comfort, more like correction. Then, in a whisper so low that only I could hear it, he hissed, "Arthur, stop crying." I blinked, confused. Had I misheard? Who tells a father to stop crying at his own daughter's funeral? But his lips tightened, and his eyes flashed with something I couldn't name. Irritation? Embarrassment? Disgust? "You're embarrassing yourself," he murmured. "Embarrassing myself. At the burial of my child." The words slammed into my chest like a fist. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe. I just stared at him, my mouth slightly open, while he maintained that eerily calm facade, turning instantly to shake hands with a colleague who had just approached. He flashed that same politician's smile, wide and immaculate, as if he hadn't just stabbed me with his whisper. A chill curled down my spine. Was this grief? Or cruelty? Or something else entirely? And why, of all things, was he worried about appearance? The service dragged on, each minute stretching like taut wire. I felt suspended between heartbreak and confusion, between love for Emily and an unsettling awareness that something in Nathan's behavior didn't fit. Something fell off, wrong, hidden. Every so often, I caught him glancing at me with a controlled, almost measuring look, the way someone might check a crack in a wall they intend to plaster over. As people began to drift toward the reception area, murmuring condolences and wiping their eyes, I stepped closer to the grave one last time. The coffin was already covered in the first few shovels of soil. I whispered goodbye under my breath. I hoped Emily could hear me somehow. I hoped she knew I never stopped being her father, even when she grew up, even when she moved away, even when Nathan became part of her life. A part one never fully understood. I lingered until most people had walked off. My hands trembled again, not from cold, but from the weight of everything unsaid. And then Nathan approached me, not with sympathy, not with love, not even with neutral civility, but with purpose. He stepped beside me, but he didn't look at the grave. He looked directly at me. His tone remained soft, dangerously soft. His lips barely moved. His eyes didn't blink. And when this is over, he whispered, I want you gone from my house. His house. The words made the world tilt. The house I had lived in for 12 years. The house I had paid for. The house where I raised Emily. The house where every memory of her still lived, still breathed. But Nathan didn't know that, and neither did anyone else. Not yet. His final words sliced through the damp air, a command wrapped in calm, a threat wrapped in civility. Get out. And just like that, everything broke. After the funeral, everyone drifted back to the house in Didsbury. The house. The one Emily grew up in. The one I paid for. The one Nathan now called his without hesitation. Rain clung to coats as guests stepped inside, shaking off umbrellas in the hallway. Someone put on a kettle. Someone else placed a tray of supermarket pastries on the dining table. Soft murmurs filled the room. Condolences, gentle memories, awkward attempts at comfort from people who didn't know what to say to a father who had just buried his only child. The house should have felt warm, comforting, familiar. Instead, it felt like a waiting room, a place where emotions were kept at low volume, so no one would disturb the atmosphere Nathan curated. And he was curating it. He moved between guests like an experienced host, shaking hands, taking coats, giving instructions with a steady, level tone. A hand on a shoulder, a quiet nod, even a small smile when someone praised Emily's kindness. But every story he told, every memory he shared, had a strange gravity to it, pulling everything back toward himself. Emily always loved how hard-working I was, he said to a distant cousin. She supported all my ideas, believed in me, he said to one of her old nursing friends. I tried my best for her, he said to an elderly neighbor. His voice never trembled. He was the picture of composed grief, tidy, controlled, respectable. And me? I sat on the sofa Emily used to nap on after long shifts. Her favorite gray blanket still draped across the backrest. I used to cover her with it when she fell asleep mid-conversation. She always smiled when she woke up and found it over her legs. Now I sat there alone, quiet, small, invisible. People passed in front of me without noticing. A few patted my shoulder in passing, but most drifted toward Nathan, the young widower, the man they believed needed support the most. I watched him move, admired even, as if he were the center of gravity in the room. The strong one, the responsible one, the practical one. Perhaps they didn't see the stiffness in his eyes. Perhaps they didn't hear the edge beneath his polite tone. Perhaps they didn't want to look too closely. I didn't blame them. It was easier that way. After nearly an hour, while I sat staring into a cup of untouched tea, Nathan approached me. He held a plate of sandwiches, perfectly arranged, perfectly untouched. He didn't offer them like comfort. He held them like a prop. Arthur, he said in a voice meant to sound compassionate but sharpened with intention. "We need to talk." Guests glanced over, sensing tension but pretending not to. Their expressions softened, ready to pity him, ready to justify whatever he was about to say. After all, I was the older one, the dependent one, the widowed father who must surely be struggling financially. The narrative he built around me hung in the room like an unspoken script everyone accepted. Nathan crouched slightly, lowering his voice so only I could hear, though loud enough for sympathetic ears nearby to catch the tone. "I can't support you anymore," he said. "Emily was the one helping you. Now that she's gone, you need to find somewhere else to live." My breath caught, not because the words were harsh, but because they were delivered with such calm certainty, as if he were talking about rearranging furniture, not evicting the father of the woman he buried hours ago. A few people nearby nodded gently, as though he were making a difficult but necessary decision. A couple of them even cast me sympathetic looks. Poor old Arthur, living off the younger couple. They saw me, through Nathan's lens, a burden disguised as family. "I've already looked up council flats for pensioners," he continued, still in that soft, managerial tone. "You should apply quickly. They have long waiting lists." My throat tightened. My fingers curled around the blanket beside me. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't cruel in any obvious way. There was no venom, no shouting, no threats. Just practicality, efficiency, logic. He sounded like a man handling administrative tasks, crossing off items on a mental checklist. Looking at him, young, composed, neatly dressed, speaking in that firm but kind voice, it was easy to almost see his point. Maybe 3 adults in one house would be a strain. Maybe he'd need space to grieve on his own. Maybe the bills were too much. Maybe I was the one prolonging something that had already broken. He made the argument sound reasonable, responsible, necessary, and that was what stung the most. Not the words, but the logic behind them. Because a villain who screams is easy to hate. A villain who whispers sense is harder to see coming. But here's what Nathan didn't know, what the room didn't know, why didn't dare say out loud. Emily had told me everything. Months before she died, she came to me shaking, hands cold, voice trembling, eyes filled with the kind of fear she tried so hard to hide. She confessed that Nathan had been taking out loans behind her back, dumping money into get-rich-quick schemes, pretending he was providing for them, pressuring her to trust his big plans, losing money faster than he could invent lies to cover it. He looked successful on the outside. He performed stability like an actor on stage. But behind closed doors, he was drowning. Bills piled on top of each other. Minimum payments missed. Letters marked final notice hidden in drawers. Bank calls silenced. Payday loans swallowed by more payday loans. Emily had been the one quietly keeping their lives afloat. She worked extra shifts. She paid the utilities. She bought groceries. She covered his mistakes with her kindness. She told me she was tired, so tired, but she still believed Nathan would change. He never did. And now, with her gone, he needed the house. Not for space, not for grief, not for healing, but because it was the only valuable thing left that could keep his head above water. His desperation wasn't obvious. It was hidden behind a pressed suit and a steady voice. But desperation is still desperation, and desperate people can be dangerous. As he stood over me, waiting for me to agree, waiting for me to accept my exile, I saw the truth shimmering beneath his calm expression. This wasn't about practicality, or grief, or space. This was survival. His survival. His attempt to salvage the life he had pretended to build. He needed me out of the way, out of the picture, out of the house that he planned to use as his last lifeline. And no one in the room questioned it. They saw a responsible man doing the hard thing. They saw a son-in-law helping an elderly father-in-law find appropriate accommodation. They didn't see the cracks. They didn't see the debt. They didn't see the danger. But the audience does. You do. You see the mask slipping. You see the truth beneath the politeness. You see the storm Nathan is trying so hard to hide. And the question that now hung in the air was simple, haunting, inevitable. What exactly is Nathan hiding? And how far we go to protect it? In the days after the funeral, the house grew quieter. Too quiet. People stopped visiting. The condolences dried up. The sympathy that once felt overwhelming faded into a polite silence that hurt even more. Grief settled into the walls like damp, and every creak, every shadow, every echo reminded me of Emily. Her laugh, her footsteps, her way of humming subconsciously whenever she cooked. But slowly, so slowly I didn't notice at first, those echoes began to disappear. Because Nathan had a plan. Not the kind of loud, chaotic plan that announces itself. No, this was a plan carried out with the precision of someone rearranging a spreadsheet. It started with a photo frame, one I found missing from the hallway. A picture of Emily at age 5, standing in her first school uniform, red cheeks, missing tooth, proud grin. I searched the shelf, the side table, even the floor in case it had fallen. Nothing. When I asked Nathan, he didn't look up from his laptop. "Oh, that one? It was cracked," he said. I tossed it. Just reducing clutter. Clutter. The word punched me in the stomach. But I stayed quiet. I blamed grief. My own mind. Maybe I had misplaced it. But then came the next disappearance. Her nursing award, the Employee of the Year plaque she cried over when she brought it home because she felt seen for the first time in months. Gone from the mantle. "Nathan," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Where's Emily's award?" He glanced up briefly, eyes cool and unbothered. "It looked a bit old-fashioned," he said. "Didn't match the decor." I boxed it. Tidying up. The lie was smooth, effortless, practiced. And that was when I felt it, the first crack inside me. A hairline fracture of anger piercing through the fog of grief. But I still said nothing, because part of me wondered, was he trying to cope in his own strange, clinical way? Was this decluttering genuinely helping him? Was he removing reminders because they hurt too much? I wanted to believe that. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. Until the third disappearance. Her mother's blanket. The pale blue one, knitted with uneven stitches, worn thin from decades of love. The blanket Emily used when she was sick. The blanket she clutched after her mother died. The blanket I covered her with on the sofa whenever she fell asleep on movie nights. That blanket lived draped over the back of the couch like a permanent hug. And one morning it wasn't there. I tore the living room apart. Cushions thrown. Drawers opened. Corners checked. Nothing. My heart pounded against my ribs, heavy and desperate. I found Nathan in the kitchen, calmly slicing avocado on a toast as if life were perfectly normal. "Nathan," I said, breathless. "Where's Margaret's blanket?" "Emily's mother's blanket." He didn't even turn around. "It was old, Arthur. Worn out. I assumed you wouldn't mind." "I wouldn't mind." My voice cracked open. "For God's sake, it was her mother's." He finally turned, knife in hand, not threateningly, but casually, as if my outburst were an inconvenience, a smudge on his countertop. "You're overreacting," he said, his tone maddeningly calm. "We can't keep holding on to everything forever. It's not healthy." Healthy. The word stung like acid, as if remembering my daughter was unhealthy, as if grief needed to be cleaned up, organized, put away neatly like the clutter he despised. But the worst blow came the next day. The wall on the staircase, our wall, where Emily's childhood paintings had hung since she first scribbled with crayons. Gone. Every single one. Not boxed. Not stored. Gone. A row of clean white space stared back at me, blank and cold. I stood there for a long time, fingers brushing the empty wall, as if I could still feel the texture of her dried paint strokes. The house felt hollow, a stranger to itself, a stranger to me. It wasn't just items disappearing. It was memories, history, pieces of a life being scraped away quietly, methodically, like someone peeling wallpaper off a wall until all that remained was something blank, something manageable, something controlled. Nathan's version of the world. Each removal struck me harder than the last. At first it was confusion, then hurt, then disbelief. But now something else stirred beneath the grief. A slow, simmering fury, quiet but potent, the kind of anger that doesn't explode, it hardens. Because at last I understood. He wasn't decluttering. He was erasing. Erasing Emily. Erasing her mother. Erasing me. erasing any trace that this house ever belonged to someone else. On the sixth day, I found him in the dining room, sorting through more boxes, my boxes this time. Memories of decades gone by. Hand-carved keepsakes, my late wife's wedding ring set, letters Emily wrote to me when she was little. He didn't even look up when I walked in. Thought I'd help speed the process, he said, his voice light, controlled. These things should be packed anyway. My wife's rings, I whispered, staring at the open box. He shrugged. Things change, Arthur. Houses change. People move on. This place needs order. Space. Stability. That word again. Stability. As if I were chaos. As if grief were clutter. As if belonging were conditional. I felt the anger rising in my chest, pressing against my rib cage, begging to spill out. But before I could say anything, he stood, wiped his hands on a microfiber cloth, and walked out of the room as if dismissing an employee after a meeting. I collapsed into a chair, hands gripping the edge of the dining table. My breathing uneven, my heart heavy, my fists clenched. How far would he go? How much would he erase? How long until there was nothing left of the life we built? The answer came that evening. Nathan walked into the living room holding a printed sheet of paper. It looked official, structured, organized. He placed down the coffee table in front of me, smoothing the corners with that familiar precision. Move-out timeline for Arthur Hale, the header read. Beneath it, a detailed plan, week-by-week tasks, deadlines, reminders. At the bottom, highlighted in yellow, final move-out date, 30 days from today. I stared at it, chest tightening. The room felt smaller, colder, shrinking around me. He sat across from me, leaning forward slightly. I'm not your enemy, Arthur, he said softly. But I need stability. This house needs stability. And you were never meant to live here forever. His tone wasn't cruel, not even remotely. It was reasonable, measured, almost caring, in a twisted way. A villain with a point. A man so desperate to keep his life from collapsing that he convinced himself he was doing the right thing. My grief cracked again, split open by helplessness, filled with a quiet, burning strength. Because Nathan didn't know everything. He didn't know what was hidden in the old mahogany chest under my bed. He didn't know what Emily had entrusted me with. He didn't know how much power those documents carried. But soon, he would. And for the first time in weeks, a spark of something, hope, maybe lit inside me. Maybe I wasn't as powerless as he thought. The house was silent that night. Not peaceful silence. Not resting silence. The kind of silence that feels like someone holding their breath in the dark. Like the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. Nathan had gone to bed early. His door closed. His steps quiet. His conscience, perhaps, finally weighing on him. Or maybe he simply slept well knowing he had handed me my eviction notice without remorse. I sat alone in the living room, lights off, the moon casting a pale glow through the curtains. My hands rested on my knees, fingers trembling with a mixture of grief, exhaustion, and something else. Resolve. A quiet, heavy resolve that had been building with every photograph removed, every memory boxed, every object erased. There comes a moment in grief when the tears stop because something stronger rises. Something sharper. And for me, that moment had arrived. I stood slowly, joints aching with age and heartbreak, and walked toward my bedroom. The floorboards creaked under my feet, soft, familiar, mournful, as if the house itself remembered who had walked these halls the longest. In the corner of my room, beneath the bed, lay the old mahogany chest. I hadn't opened it in years. Even touching it felt like touching a ghost. It smelled faintly of sandalwood and something older, history perhaps, family, memory, all the things Nathan had been so eager to scrub away. I pulled it out into the center of the room. The weight of it scraped across the wooden floor like a warning. For a long moment, I simply stared at it. My heart thudded slowly, deeply, like a drum calling me to battle. Inside this chest was the truth. Truth I had chosen to keep buried. Truth Emily had trusted me with. Truth strong enough to shatter Nathan's entire world. But tonight I needed to remember that truth. To see it. To feel in my hands. So I lifted the lid. A soft creak split the silence, and the inside of the chest breathed out a faint scent of old paper, ink, and locked-away secrets. The first thing I saw was the envelope containing the original deed to the house. The house Nathan believed belonged to him. The house he controlled, ruled, and reshaped to erase us. My name sat clearly on the title. Arthur Hale, owner, 2007, paid in full. No mortgage, no joint ownership, no claims from anyone. Just me. My chest tightened as I held the paper. The edges were crisp, the ink beginning to fade. Proof. Solid, undeniable proof. For 12 years, I had paid the bills. Quietly, without complaint, without boasting. Because I didn't help Emily, so she could praise me. I helped her because she was my daughter. Because that's what fathers do. The next stack in the chest confirmed it. Bank statements dating back more than a decade. Electricity bills in my name. Gas bills. Council tax. Insurance. Maintenance. Every essential expense. Paid by me. All of them. I felt the anger push against my ribs again. Not fiery, not wild, but deep and steady like rising water. The kind that doesn't splash. The kind that floods. Nathan had stood in my living room, looked into my grieving, broken face, and said he couldn't support me anymore. He believed his own lie. But the deeper truth was simple. He had never supported anyone. Not financially, not emotionally, not honestly. He was a man standing on a foundation built entirely by someone else's sacrifice, and he didn't even know it. My hands shook as I placed the bills aside and picked up the next document. A letter, folded neatly, written in Emily's delicate handwriting. Just seeing her writing again took the breath out of me. I had to sit down. I had to blink away tears before the words blurred. The letter was dated 6 months before her death. Dad, it began. I need you to promise me something. Her voice echoed in my mind, soft, tired, but determined. She wrote about Nathan's debts, about the truth he hid behind confidence and charm, about the loans he took without telling her, about the schemes he believed would make him rich, about the shame he felt when everything fell apart, and how she was covering it. All of it, with extra shifts, sleepless nights, and quiet anxiety. She wrote, "He's not a bad man, Dad. He's just lost. He's drowning, and he won't admit it." A stabbing mix of pity and sorrow twisted inside me. Yes, that was Nathan's tragedy. He wasn't evil in the way villains normally are. He was a man who desperately wanted to succeed, but didn't know how, didn't know when to stop, didn't know how to carry the weight of his own choices. But he knew how to let others carry it for him. The next item in the chest hit even harder. A formal agreement. Thick paper. Legal formatting. Signatures at the bottom. Emily had drawn it up with a solicitor. A witnessed, legally binding document stating, if anything happened to her, I, Arthur Hale, would remain the legal owner of the house. No transfer to Nathan without my written consent. I ran my thumb over her signature. Emily wasn't naive. She wasn't blind to the man she married. She loved him, yes, deeply, fiercely, but she wasn't going to let him gamble her family home away if she were gone. That thought hurt more than I could bear. She prepared for the possibility of leaving this world before she turned 35. What had she known? What had she feared? What had she sensed? The lump in my throat nearly choked me. But the final discovery, the last document, shifted everything. A loan agreement, 12 pages long. Drafted by my solicitor years ago, £120,000, lent from me to Nathan, for the purpose of business investment. He had signed without reading. Desperate, hopeful, reckless. But there was more. The loan was secured against any assets he would inherit from Emily, meaning, if Emily died, every asset tied to her, including the house he believed was his, instantly reverted to me, legally, irrevocably. He had been living in a house he effectively owed me for, and he had no idea. I sat there, clutching the papers, breathing hard. Not with triumph, not with vengeance, with heartbreak. I never wanted this power. I never wanted leverage. I never wanted to hold this over him. When Emily asked me to lend him the money, she begged, "Please don't embarrass him, Dad. Just help him quietly. He'll get better. He'll change." And I believed her, because I believed in her kindness. But now the truth felt like a blade in my hands. I didn't want revenge. Not yet. What I wanted first was understanding. Why Nathan was doing this. Why he was erasing her. Why he was pushing me out. Was it grief twisting him into someone unrecognizable? Or was desperation tightening its grip around his throat? The chest now lay open at my feet. A vault of truths heavy enough to crack the walls of the life Nathan had built on illusion. I closed my eyes and whispered into the quiet. What am I meant to do with this, Emily? There was no answer, just the creak of the house settling around me, as if bracing itself for the storm yet to come. The question now lingered in the air like a held breath. Should I confront him, reveal everything, or wait? Because the next move, mine or his, could change everything. The sunlight that Sunday morning was painfully bright, the kind that made the dust in the air shimmer, the kind Emily used to call good weather optimism. I remember looking at it through the curtains and thinking how cruel it felt. How wrong. How could the world shine like this when everything inside me felt dark? I heard voices downstairs. Footsteps. Confident ones. Purposeful, brisk, unfamiliar. When I walked into the hallway, I froze. 2 estate agents stood in my home. Clipboards. Measuring tapes. Polished shoes clicking on the hardwood floors I had installed with my own hands. They wandered through each room like archaeologists cataloging the ruins of someone else's life. One of them, a tall man with silver hair, ran his fingers along the banister Emily used to slide down as a child. Great bones, he said. We can modernize this quickly. Modernize. Such a simple word. But in that moment, it felt like a strike of a hammer. Nathan was right behind them, walking with his arms folded like he owned the air itself. We'll list it right after Arthur moves out, he said. My breath caught. They hadn't even noticed me standing there. Or maybe they had, and simply didn't care. The agents moved into the living room. I followed quietly, like a ghost trailing the living. They pointed, gestured, imagined. That fireplace, one said. Gone. Old-fashioned. A fireplace I had built myself, brick by brick, for Emily's 17th birthday. And this wall, the other added. We knock it down, open up the space. Nathan nodded eagerly. Oh, definitely. And we'll repaint over that mural in the hallway. The mural. Emily had painted it at 15, a swirl of blues and greens and golds, like a storm captured mid-motion. She used to joke that every house needed a bit of chaos on the walls. The agents scribbled notes. Nathan stood taller. I stood smaller. Then it happened. Nathan turned toward them and said, loudly, confidently, with the tone of a man who believed every word that left his mouth. You'll have to ignore Arthur's emotional attachment. He never contributed financially. It was a casual sentence, tossed out like an unimportant detail. But it hit me like a fist. The agents nodded sympathetically, glancing at me the way strangers look at a stray dog, with pity, but not enough to care. I didn't respond. Couldn't. My hands shook in a way I hadn't felt since the day Emily called me from the hospital, saying she'd found a lump. The house felt suddenly smaller, yet the voices louder. Every corner of the room pulsed with memories. Emily curled on the sofa with a blanket, Emily laughing by the fireplace, Emily painting her mural while music blared from her speakers. And now strangers were planning to tear it all apart, like uprooting a garden just to lay down concrete. Nathan walked over as if everything happening was normal. Arthur, he said with a polite, practiced smile, the agents will only be here for a bit. They just need measurements. Measurements of the life I had built, of the home Emily grew up in, of the walls that held the echoes of her footsteps. I swallowed hard, fighting the instinct to shout, to protest, to remind him of who had really built this place. But grief has a way of silencing a person. It ties your tongue, weighs down your chest, makes your thoughts feel muddied and slow. The agents began discussing the kitchen. Rip out the cabinets, one said. Replace the flooring, the other added. Arthur never updated anything anyway, Nathan chimed in, lightly chuckling. That laugh cut deeper than any formal eviction notice ever could. It wasn't just about the house. It wasn't about the walls or the renovations or the paint. It was about erasing me, erasing my years of sacrifice, erasing my place in Emily's life, erasing the truth he didn't know, that the very home he was casually selling belonged to the man he was trying to throw out. My chest tightened, not metaphorically, physically. A sharp pressure spread through my ribs, like something inside me was breaking under its own weight. I leaned against the kitchen doorway, trying to steady myself. The estate agents kept talking. Nathan kept nodding. The world kept moving, indifferent to my suffering. And I wondered, quietly, painfully, how could a man be so confident in a lie that he believes it more deeply than the truth? How many times had Nathan told himself the story where he was the provider, the responsible one, the hero, keeping a crumbling household afloat? How often had he practiced this version of events in his own mind, until reality bent to fit it? The worst part wasn't his ignorance. It was his certainty. A certainty so strong that in the eyes of others, I looked like the helpless old widower living off charity. A burden, a shadow, a man overstaying his welcome. And I knew that if I opened my mouth, if I told them the truth right there, it would feel like using Emily's memory as a weapon, something she never would have wanted. So I stayed silent, trembling, bleeding on the inside where no one could see. Nathan eventually turned to me with a tone that almost sounded reasonable. "This is just part of moving forward," he said. "It's painful, but life doesn't pause, Arthur. Life doesn't pause." He said it as if grief could be clocked in and out of, as if mourning had a timetable, as if losing Emily wasn't the single gravity shift that had cracked my world in half. The agents finished their tour. They shook Nathan's hand. They barely looked at me. When the door finally closed behind them, the house fell quiet again. But the quiet wasn't comforting. It was suffocating. I stood alone in the middle of the living room, the room where Emily took her first steps, where we celebrated birthdays, where she whispered her secrets to me the night before her wedding. A home full of memories, and a man full of determination to erase them. I sank onto the edge of the sofa. My breathing was shallow. My chest ached. But beneath the pain was something else. A spark. Small. Fierce. Unmoving. Pain can crush a person, but it can also carve out space for courage. I knew the truth. I held the truth. And the truth was a shield sharper than any weapon Nathan wielded. But still, something in me hesitated. Because acting now, acting out of anger, acting while grief still cloaked my heart, would feel like betraying Emily, like turning her memory into a battlefield. So I sat there in silence, the thick, heavy kind that stretches a moment into eternity, and let one question echo in my mind. How long can a man stay silent before silence itself becomes the greatest wound? That morning, something inside me broke, but something else rose. The lowest point of my life had given birth to the beginning of the rise. And though Nathan didn't know it yet, the truth was already shifting the ground beneath his feet. For 2 days, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Nathan moved around with the restless energy of a man planning a future that wasn't his to claim. Estate brochures lay scattered on the table. Phone calls drifted through the corridors, him talking about valuations, viewings, renovations. His voice carried that same confidence, that same assumption of ownership, the same unshakable belief that everything was unfolding exactly as it should. But inside me, something had shifted. Not anger, not revenge, just clarity. So, late in the afternoon, as a wind brushed against the windows like a whispered warning, I heard a knock at the door. A calm, steady knock. Measured. Precise. Nathan answered, calling out "one moment" in that practiced, courteous tone he used when he wanted to impress someone. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching as he opened the door. At first, he smiled. A polite social mask, one he wore often these days. Then he saw the badge, the professional folder, the gaze of a woman who did not come for small talk. His smile faded. "Good afternoon," Ms. Rowan said, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm here to speak with Mr. Arthur Hale." Nathan blinked. Confusion twisted into something sharper. He glanced at me, then back at her. Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly around the edges. "There's a misunderstanding," she replied. "One that must be corrected immediately." The words hung in the air like the first rumble of distant thunder. Nathan stepped aside slowly, uncertainly, as she walked in. Her shoes clicked against the floor, confident footsteps in a home that had recently been ruled by someone else's confidence. She set her folder on the dining table. The estate agents, who had arrived minutes earlier for yet another round of planning, stood awkwardly near the doorway. They had come eager, ready to discuss market value and renovation strategies. But now their eyes darted around nervously, sensing the shift in atmosphere. The light-hearted chatter evaporated. Something heavier filled the space. We gathered in the living room. A strange circle of people. 2 estate agents, a grieving father, a panicked son-in-law, and a solicitor with truth sealed in a folder as sharp as a blade. Nathan tried to smile again. It came out wrong. Tight. Forced. Look, I don't know what Emily asked you to handle, but Mr. Hale, Ms. Rowan cut in softly, turning toward me. Shall I begin? I nodded. She opened the folder. The air seemed to tighten. She laid the first document on the table. Not dramatically, not angrily, but with the calm precision of someone accustomed to ending arguments before they begin. The original deed to this house, she said, purchased by Mr. Arthur Hale in 2007. Fully paid. In his name alone. The estate agents leaned in. Nathan's posture stiffened. Before anyone could speak, she placed down the next set of papers. Bank records, she continued. 12 years of payments. Utilities. Maintenance. Taxes. All made by Mr. Hale. A small sound escaped Nathan. A half-breath, half-protest. Ms. Rowan didn't pause. She pulled out a sealed envelope next. Worn, slightly crumpled, edges brown with age. Emily's letter, she said softly, outlining concerns regarding financial instability in the household. I looked away. Hearing my daughter's name spoken so gently hurt deeper than any shout. But she wasn't finished. She revealed another set of documents, these ones heavier. Binding. Stamped. Witnessed. This, she said, is the loan agreement Emily arranged with her father. A legally binding £120,000 loan, co-signed by Nathan, to prevent him from taking out additional risky debts. A hush fell over the room. The estate agents took a step back. Whether out of discomfort or fear of becoming entangled, I couldn't tell. But it was the next sheet, the final agreement, that truly shattered the room. In the event of Emily Hale's passing, she read, all assets tied to her name, including marital property and inheritance, revert solely to Mr. Arthur Hale. She placed it gently on the stack, then stepped back, leaving the truth exposed in the open like a wound. Nathan stared at the documents as if they were written in a language he had never seen. This, his voice trembled. This can't be real. You signed these documents, Ms. Rowan said quietly. All of them. He shook his head slowly, like a child refusing to accept that the world didn't match the picture he'd painted in his mind. Emily said. He swallowed hard. She said she took care of things, that we were managing. She never told me this. His eyes darted across the papers. The deed, the letters, the signatures, the dates, desperately searching for an escape, a loophole, a mistake. There was none. The estate agents stepped back again, almost in unison. Their earlier excitement had evaporated into palpable discomfort. One of them murmured something about needing to review schedules and quietly edged toward the hallway. But Nathan didn't notice. His world was collapsing too loudly for him to hear anything else. I thought. He rubbed his face with trembling hands. I thought Emily trusted me. Emotion cracked through his voice like lightning. I thought she believed in me. Something inside me twisted, painfully, unexpectedly. Because in that moment, he didn't look like the man who barked orders at funerals, who erased photos, who spoke confidently about selling a house he didn't own. He looked like a frightened boy standing in the ruins of his own illusions. He whispered, barely audible. She didn't trust me, did she? The question hit me harder than I expected. For a second, I felt the old weight of empathy, the instinct to reach out, to soften the blow, to offer comfort even when he had shown me none. But then the echo of the past week returned. Stop crying. You're embarrassing yourself. Get out of my house. He never contributed. Ignore his emotional attachment. Pain layered over pain. Still, the human heart is a strange thing. It can ache for someone who wounded it. Nathan sank onto the edge of the armchair. the same one where Emily used to curl up with tea after a long shift. His shoulders slumped, stripped of arrogance. For the first time since Emily died, the man looked truly broken. And for the first time, he finally saw how much he had misunderstood. The room stayed silent for a long time, a silence filled not with victory, but with the sharp sting of truth, truth that liberates and destroys in the same breath. A truth that left one question burning in the air. Now that the power had shifted, now that everything was exposed, what would I do next? Mercy? Justice? Consequence? Even I didn't know the answer yet. For a long moment after the documents were laid bare on the table, no one moved. It felt as if the house itself had stopped breathing. Even the distant hum of passing cars outside faded into silence, leaving nothing but the soft, uneven sound of someone trying and failing to hold themselves together. Nathan, he stood there like a man balancing on the final splinter of a collapsing bridge, and then the splinter snapped. He dropped to his knees, not with drama, not with performance, but with the weight of someone whose soul had been hollowed out from the inside. A raw, broken sob escaped him, then another, and another, the kind of sobs a person can't fake, the kind that rise from grief so deep it has no language, the kind that makes even bystanders shift uncomfortably, unsure where sympathy ends and accountability begins. He pressed both hands to his face, shoulders shaking, cheeks blotched, breath uneven and sharp. I loved her, he choked out between sobs. I know I messed up. I know I made mistakes. But she was all I had. Emily, she was all I had. Nobody spoke. Not Ms. Rowan. Not the estate agents, one of whom quietly lowered their clipboard as though ashamed of even holding it. Not me. I watched him cry, and a war began inside my chest. Part of me remembered the man who silenced my grief at the funeral. The man who called the house his before the soil on Emily's grave had settled. The man who removed her pictures, her awards, her memories. But another part of me, an older, quieter, wiser part, saw something else. A young widower barely in his 30s. A man who had grown up without stability. A boy who wanted to impress, to succeed, to be more than his fears told him he was. A man who panicked when life cracked open beneath him. And a man who had just finally, painfully realized how much his wife had protected him. A realization sharp enough to break anyone. My throat tightened as I looked at him, not with pity, with truth. The truth that grief isn't a competition. His loss didn't cancel mine. Mine didn't erase his. We were two broken men standing in the ruins of Emily's absence, each clinging to different pieces of her. I took a breath, long and steady. I could have let anger guide me. I could have delivered revenge neatly wrapped in legal documents. I could have watched him crawl out of the house, disgraced and defeated. But when I closed my eyes, I heard Emily's voice from a memory years ago. Dad, people don't need punishment as much as they need guidance. Sometimes the cruelest people are just scared people. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is be kind when they least deserve it. I felt my chest tighten. She always had a way of disarming me like that. I stepped forward slowly. Each movement felt heavy, but steady. Nathan didn't look up at first. He kept crying into his hands, trembling as if the truth had cracked something essential inside him. When I reached him, I stopped just a foot away. Nathan, I said. He froze, his hands lowered slightly, eyes red, unfocused, struggling to meet mine. I don't hate you, I said quietly. He blinked, confused, raw, almost childlike. But you were cruel. I continued, my voice steady but gentle. And you didn't have to be. His mouth trembled. He nodded, barely able to speak. I know, he whispered. I know, Arthur. I don't know what I was doing. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle anything. I didn't. His voice broke again. I'm sorry. It wasn't elegant. Not poetic. Just honest. Honest in a way that made the whole room shift. I glanced at Ms. Rowan. She watched silently, her expression unreadable. Not stern, not cold. Just quietly witnessing the unraveling of story she had legally prepared but emotionally never expected. The estate agents looked completely out of place, clutching their folders, eyes wide, as though they had wandered into a confession they were never meant to hear. Nathan's tears dripped on the floor. He looked lost, small, a man stripped of pride and pretense, finally facing himself. I let out a slow breath. Then I said the words that shook the room like a quiet earthquake. "You can stay here." Nathan stared up at me, eyes widening. For how long?" he asked, voice fragile. 60 days, I said. "No rent, no conditions, no threats." The estate agents gasped softly. Ms. Rowan raised her brows, startled. Even I felt the weight of those words reverberate through the room. Nathan's face contorted in disbelief. You do that," he whispered. "After everything? After how I treated you?" I nodded. "Because kindness isn't weakness," I said. "And Emily would have wanted both of us to heal, not destroy each other." Nathan's lips parted, then quivered. His chest trembled as another wave of sobs overtook him. Harder, deeper, as though the offer itself cracked open a new kind of pain. He covered his face again. But this time, it wasn't grief for Emily. It was grief for himself, for the man he had become, for the choices he made, for the forgiveness he never expected, a forgiveness he didn't know what to do with. Ms. Rowan exhaled softly, almost in awe. The estate agents looked down, perhaps ashamed of their earlier eagerness to erase the home's history. A strange, respectful silence filled the room. I felt no triumph, only relief. Relief that I hadn't let anger decide who I was. Relief that I hadn't betrayed Emily's memory with revenge. Relief that I had found strength in a place where weakness had once lived. Nathan finally lowered his hands. He wiped his face, breath shaky. "Thank you," he whispered, hoarse, broken, sincere. "I don't deserve it, but thank you." I nodded gently. This wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was the start of something else. A pause. A space. A chance. A moment when two men, bound by the same woman, allowed grief to soften into humanity. The house felt different then. Lighter. As if Emily herself had placed a hand on each of our shoulders and whispered, "Enough. Build, don't break." Nathan sat on the floor, breathing unevenly, like someone slowly returning to the surface after nearly drowning. And I stood there, realizing something important. Strength isn't proven by how fiercely we fight, but by how gently we choose to stand. And the question that lingered in the quiet room was one even I couldn't answer. Would this act of kindness save him, or break him further? What would Nathan do with this second chance? And could damaged men truly rebuild anything at all? The house felt different after everything that had happened. Quieter, softer, almost as if it were exhaling after months of tension. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains in gentle gold streaks, warming the air with the kind of calm that only arrives after a storm has finally passed. No voices arguing, no footsteps pacing sharply across the hallway, no strangers evaluating the walls as if they belonged to them. Just stillness, just a home breathing again. For the first time in a long time, Arthur walked through the house with no sense of dread clutching his ribs. The living room was exactly as Emily loved it. The fireplace intact, her mural untouched, the color she had painted swirling across the hallway like a frozen dance. The house held its memories close, and Arthur felt them settling around him like an embrace. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't bracing himself for confrontation. He wasn't shrinking under the weight of someone else's bitterness. He was simply living. The 2 months came and went quietly. Nathan kept his distance, respectful in a way he hadn't been at any other point in their collapsing relationship. He didn't barge into conversations. He didn't make demands. He didn't walk around as though the house were his empire. Instead, he moved through the house like a guest, soft, careful, muted. Sometimes Arthur heard him crying at night. Not loudly, not destructively, just the kind of grief that hums through the walls when someone finally stops lying to themselves. And Arthur didn't hate him for it. If anything, he understood it. On the final morning, the last day of Nathan's 60 days, the house returned to that same gentle quietness. No slamming doors, no angry words, no dramatic exit. Nathan simply packed his things, step by step, piece by piece, removing his life from the rooms he once claimed with arrogance. Arthur didn't approach him. Nathan didn't seek him out. There were no confrontations left to have. Everything that needed to be said had already been carved into the air weeks before. But when Arthur came downstairs later, long after Nathan's car had pulled out of the driveway, he noticed something on the kitchen counter. A folded letter. No envelope. Just his name, written in handwriting that trembled slightly. Arthur. The sight alone made him pause. He reached for it slowly, carefully, as though touching something fragile, because in a way, he was. He unfolded the paper and felt a tightening in his throat at the quiet humility in the first line. Arthur, thank you for showing kindness even after I treated you so terribly. There are no excuses, no defenses, no attempts to rewrite the truth. Just honesty. The letter continued. Emily was right about you. I hope one day I could be the kind of man she believed I could be. By the time Arthur finished reading, the house felt even quieter than before, as if honoring the sincerity left behind. No bitterness, no blame, just the soft echo of a man who finally understood the consequences of his actions. Arthur placed the letter down gently, letting out a long, steady breath. It wasn't triumph he felt. It wasn't victory. It wasn't the fierce, electric satisfaction of revenge he'd imagined months ago. What he felt was something deeper, something calmer, something almost warm. Closure. Not forced closure. Not demanded closure. Not revenge masquerading as justice. Real closure. Later, he heard through a mutual friend that Nathan had moved to Liverpool. A quieter life. A smaller flat. A therapist who asked him the questions he had spent years avoiding. It wasn't redemption in a cinematic, heroic sense. He wasn't transformed into a flawless man, but he was changing, healing, trying, and sometimes that was more than most people ever dared to attempt. Arthur didn't follow up. He didn't check in. He didn't build some forced friendship from the ruins of old wounds. He simply accepted that their connection, no matter how painful, no matter how messy, had ended in the only way that honored Emily's memory. With dignity. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks melted into months, Arthur rebuilt his routines. He watered the plants Emily once cared for. He polished the fireplace she painted beside. He traced the outlines of her mural with gentle fingertips, the colors still vibrant, still alive, still hers. Nothing in the house was perfect. Nothing had ever needed to be. What mattered was that every corner held a memory that deserved to remain untouched. The nights became easier too. Not free from sorrow, not completely, but easier. The grief softened from a sharp blade into a familiar ache, one Arthur learned to live with rather than fight against. Some evenings, he sat by the fireplace and said her name softly, letting it linger in the room like a prayer. The home didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt inhabited, loved, protected. He realized then, quietly, honestly, that preserving Emily's world wasn't just an act of memory. It was an act of love, a continuation of everything she stood for: gentleness, forgiveness, compassion wrapped in a kind of fierce loyalty that could soften even the hardest of hearts. And the lesson he had discovered through Nathan, through all the chaos, the betrayal, the tension, began to settle inside him like truth finally landing where it belonged. Revenge is satisfying. But grace is unforgettable, because grace wasn't weakness. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't letting someone walk over you. Grace was restraint. Grace was choice. Grace was power. And sometimes the deepest revenge wasn't destroying someone. It was letting them see exactly who you are after they try to tear you down. Nathan had seen it. The estate agents had seen it. Even Ms. Rowan, ever composed, had witnessed it. The moment Arthur chose compassion over cruelty, strength over spite, legacy over momentary victory. One quiet morning, as Arthur stood in the hallway beneath Emily's mural, the same one the estate agents had wanted to paint over, he felt something shift inside him, a sense of peace. He whispered, almost to himself, "This is still your home, Emily." And for the first time in years, he didn't cry after saying it. He just smiled. The house was no longer a battlefield. It was a sanctuary, a place where love had endured, despite everything, despite everyone. And as he walked toward the living room, sunlight dancing across the floorboards, Arthur realized something else. Forgiveness wasn't just a gift to others. It was a liberation for himself, a quiet redemption, a powerful conclusion, a closing chapter that opened inward instead of outward. But life, as always, has a way of continuing, of weaving new stories beneath the ashes of old ones. And Arthur knew, somehow, instinctively, that this wasn't the end. Not really, because sometimes forgiveness doesn't close doors. Sometimes it opens ones you never expected. But what Arthur didn't know was that someone from Nathan's past wasn't finished. And kindness, once given, can ripple farther than anyone prepares for. Don't forget, if Arthur's journey resonated with you, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to VengetaleDairy for more gripping stories of betrayal, redemption, and the quiet power of choosing purpose over revenge.